Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. My name is Jim Sutter, and I'm the CEO of the US Soybean Export Council. Welcome to the Soy Suite. It's my pleasure to have you with us today. This is an ongoing live series of conversations with global experts designed to enable you with insights and perspective on trends shaping the global food and agriculture industry, as well as to have direct access to have a conversation and engage in expertise with things related to US soy. I am so excited today to be speaking with Barry Marttin, member of the managing board at Rabobank. Thank you for having this conversation with us, Barry. Barry leads Rabobank's international wholesale and rural banking, sustainability, food and agriculture knowledge, strategy, partnerships, Rabo's Carbon Bank, and the Rabobank Foundation. Sounds like a huge job to me, right in the middle of the soy world and in an exciting spot in terms of global food production these days. He's also chairman of the Global Steering Committee of the World Economic Forum's Food Action Alliance. This group is comprised of 20+ global multi-sector leaders from the food industry, NGOs, and farmers organizations, including FAO, GAIN, IFAD, African Development Bank, Cargill, Unilever, WWF, and others. So clearly, he's got a lot of involvement and insight into the things that are going on in the global food system today. I am really looking forward to connecting with Barry and getting his insight and perspective on the way that consumers' expectations are changing, the evolving environment for the food and agriculture industry, the way that digitalization is having an impact, sustainability, a word that we hear a lot these days, the post-pandemic food system, new values to make food production and distribution smarter, more efficient, and more sustainable, and overall, how we work together to feed the world's hungry people who will continue to grow in their number and who will inhabit the planet in the years to come. Barry was born and raised in Brazil. He served in senior roles for Rabobank in Asia, South America, and now Europe, and he brings stellar global expertise with deep local experience. So before we get started, here's just a couple of housekeeping items. Barry and I will have about a 25-minute discussion, and then we'll open it up for questions. To ask a question, and these are questions coming from the audience, to ask a question, type it in the Q&A section. Please make sure to submit your questions in the Q&A tab rather than the chat tab. If you should happen to lose audio or video, don't worry, just refresh your browser and it ought to come back on. So spoken like a true IT expert that I'm not, but that's what they tell me should happen. So let's invite Barry to come on stage, and let's get started.
Well, thank you, Jim. Thank you very much for having me and for this nice introduction. Yes.
Yeah, well, it's a real pleasure to be here with you today, and thanks for taking time to join us. So I have several questions, so we'll see how many we get through before we turn to the audience's questions. First, I really believe that Rabobank and the US Soybean Export Council and all the constituents that we represent, soy farmers, US soy farmers, and our 100+ members in the export supply chain, share a common mission in encouraging our customers in the food and agriculture sector to adapt more sustainable sourcing practices in order to protect the world's future production systems. And I really think we can all come together and endorse Rabobank's commitment to growing a better world together. So first, we'd like to help us to get to know just a little more about you in this virtual world. What did you eat for lunch, or what will you eat for dinner very soon? And tell us why you've dedicated your life to food and agriculture and why you're passionate about sustainability.
Yes, well, thank you. Well, firstly, let me say I had oats for the morning with some milk and some yogurt. I try to do my diet fat-free a little bit. And I had bread for lunch, as we do here in the Netherlands. And actually looking forward for a dinner tonight, which most probably will have some chicken curry as far as I could see in the fridge this morning when I opened it. So it's a good meal. Yeah, it's good. It's well, when we sit the whole day behind the computer like we're doing right now, you need to be sure that you don't need too much. And I hope that tonight I still can play a game of tennis because the weather is very good here in the Netherlands. where's my passion coming from? Because that was the second. So I was born and raised in Brazil, as you said properly, but my parents, they were immigrants to Brazil from the Netherlands. And I grew up on the farm, between the farm and Sao Paulo. And as the picture behind me is a picture of our farm. I still run it nowadays. Yes, I know a little bit about soy. And when I was growing up in Brazil, I always saw how tough it was for my father to run the farm, to get the financing and get things done. And as he always has been a price, as a farmer, has always been price takers and not a price setter. So for me, the passion comes really from my youth. And I saw that by working at Rabobank, I can make a difference. And that's how my passion and my resolve comes from, where it comes from. Jim?
Well, that's great. What a fantastic background. So let's get right into it. Can you tell us about Rabobank's view on sustainability and the current food system? And you know, we hear a lot these days about sustainable finance, sustainable sourcing. How is Rabobank involved in this?
Yeah, I think we always have to go back to the basics, right? So the basic is the following, is that when we produce food, we emit 12 gigatons of greenhouse gases equivalent, right? So everything. So methane, everything equivalent. And why that's so important? Because in the Paris Agreement, when we went to Paris, everybody suddenly woke up to food production, and that actually food production is emitting a quarter, and everybody had different estimates, a third or whatever, but it's around a quarter of all the emissions. And if we want to get to a planet that doesn't go, we stay around that 1.5%, we have to tackle the food production. And more importantly, we all know that our populations are growing, the wealth is increasing, so that 12 gigatons is going to go to 15, 16, 17. So for me, if we want to feed everybody sustainably within the planetary boundaries, we need to look and tackle this. And we can. Because if you look at the 12 gigatons, actually 6 of the 12 gigatons are actually what we call land use emissions. And that's a very simple thing, is because the way we farm, the way that we take natural habitats away. So that's emissions that are coming from the conversion that we do to land, which can be tackled. The other 6 tons are actually, gigatons, are actually our actual food production. And we all know that from that 6 gigatons, 2 gigatons are food waste. So the reality is, if we take 12 gigatons and we need to go to close to 4 or 0 gigatons, look at the farming industry by always changing some of our practices and thinking different about farming, things that we already know from our history. It's very easy to get to that net zero they're talking about. And why net zero? Is because that means that we as an industry can actually be positive in relationship to the challenges that we have as humanity on our planet. So that's where the passion is coming from. It's about changing habits and actually paying, in my view. That's why all those financings and all those schemes that are starting to come, we need to make sure that for the ones that are making the change and doing the right things, they are paid for the services they're doing for society.
And that payment will come in the form of perhaps payments to farmers or financing terms that traders can realize, those kind of things?
Yes, more than that, right? So we know today already, right? Some things becoming hot and hotter is around that sequestration, right? So carbon sequestration in the farm, right? By changing the regenerative farming. The reality is that regenerative farming has a potential to store around 5 gigatons of carbon per year into the soil. But don't forget, this is not the production emissions. This is really sequestration of carbon that was already emitted. So that's a service, right? That's a service because others, you're putting it back in. So others have emitted the pollution or emitted the CO2. So you're doing a service to put it in again. And the reality is that from all the options that we have around there, is that the sequestration of carbon through the land, which is by no-tilling, rotation, all the things that we know, and it's all there, is actually the cheapest way of doing it. So the next alternative is that sequestration of taking out of the air and pumping into the ground is most probably as much as $300 a ton. And by what we can do as farmers is we are talking about things that doesn't even cost 10, around 50, maybe $20 a ton. We are not sure yet, but because we are looking at it, but that's what it is. So be aware of that every ton you're selling right now, most probably the next cost is actually around the $300, $400, right? So, so that's why I think that we should, as farming industry, can be paid for it. And why that? And the beauty is that this is a business that we don't know exactly where it's going to. We have never science. We have looked at it very properly, but today we know that we can capture around 1 to 2 tons per acre, right? And more or less, an acre can have something between 10 and 20 tons of carbon sequestered into it. So there is a good cash flow there that we have to look at it. And I'm really looking at this development. It's going to be a new way of looking at our farm, and it's a new way of creating a new cash flow for our activities, and we should be paid for it.
That sounds very interesting, and certainly something that farmers, there's a lot of talk about this today, but I think the details are still being worked out, because from what I hear, at least, it's still in early days in terms of how the contracts will work and things.
Yeah, and just, Jim, if I may add something. Yep. So we started at Rabobank, what we call the Rabo Carbon Bank, with the idea of starting to implement pilots to make sure that we understand how it works. As you know, we have millions of clients, farmers around the whole world that are banking with us. And what we really are trying to do, from small to medium to large farmers, to see what works and doesn't work. And how do we fix the contracts? How can we make sure that we can monitor it on the right way? How can we make sure that we understand the dynamics? How we make sure that we understand what happens if you do have to plow and you have that emission? How are we going to make that mechanism work? How are we going to relate the different types of qualities of carbons to each other, so that we can bring investors into because it's only going to work if we can find investors, right? So that's the whole thing that we are going to do. And also, and in my view, the most important thing is how can we standardize those contracts, get legislation done properly, so that it can also be based on, used as collateral, to financeable collateral, because then it really makes the difference, so that you can commit to do certain actions, you can get financing for that, and you can give that carbon that you have sequestered, because there's a value to carbon, because society needs to give value to it, so that you can give it as collateral for the bank or for any other activities that you need. So that's what we're really looking at, and we're doing a lot of pilots. I think it's very promising.
That sounds fascinating. Certainly something, agriculture, sometimes people think agriculture is sort of an old-fashioned business that doesn't change much, but I always tell them there's always something new coming in agriculture, and this is certainly something like that. I've heard you speak in other forums, Barry, about something called nature cost. Could you talk just briefly about that, and how is that tied to this carbon sequestration issue, or is it?
Well, what in my view is that today there's no price of nature really into the products that we consume. So a consumer at the supermarket, when he goes there, he could be buying a product, I would just say any product, right? A tomato, right? And one tomato could have consumed 10 times more nature to be produced than the other tomato, because talking about any process, because that guy that made that tomato that doesn't use a lot of nature, invested consciously, did the right thing, and made a good tomato. Most probably had more expenses to do it. But the other guy that didn't make the investments, did not do anything, he just can use nature, doesn't care. That tomato most probably has traveled 10,000 miles to get to that supermarket, and nobody doesn't know. And so I truly think that the moment that we are going to price nature into the products, it doesn't need to be more expensive. But then what's going to happen is that the value change, the shorter value change, or the companies that invested rightfully in their scope 3, which is the value, the amount of nature using your whole value chain, they're going to be rewarded for that. So if you don't take care of nature, you will have a higher price and you have a higher cost of your product, because you have to include it. So, and that will allow everybody to make the right investments. So I'm very positive about that. But when you talk about nature pricing, Jim, you have to add one more thing, and I think we should never forget that. When you add nature, you need to also be sure that you know what you're measuring. And that's essential. Don't forget, we don't survive as people, as humanity, by tonnage. So it's not about the ton of tomato. We also don't survive by calories. So we should not measure emissions by ton. We should measure emissions by nutrition. Because we always only survive as human beings because we have the right nutrition. That we take the right intake of food, the fibers, etc. But we have to take the 27 nutritions. And there where it really comes. Because if you want to have a nutritious food, you need to invest more nature to produce that. So when you think about meat, yes, per ton, meat might emit a lot. But if you would make the calculation of that emission by the nutrition there is in dairy, there is in milk, or the nutrition of meat, it completely changes the equations. And we have never measured that. So for me, the real thing when you talk about nature pricing is actually the pricing of nature in relation to the quality and the nutrition that you're taking, not about the tonnage you're taking, because that's the wrong measure. So I think we have to be very clear about that.
And do you foresee that I mean, that's very interesting. Is that something that you see in the circles that you're involved with the World Economic Forum and those sort of groups? Do you see that advancing? And is that something that we'll all be thinking about more in the years to come?
I think so, yes. And you see, if you look at the food summit, right, which are coming, the food security summit, which is now going to be in September, it's going to be an essential thing, right, where all the Rome agencies, so the FAO, the IFAD, they're all talking about it. So you have the 5 action tracks in there. They're looking at what is nutrition, what is the right nutrition you would be, what is nutritious food. They're looking how can we shift the patterns of the consumer. We are looking at how can we be nature positive in a way, and also looking at the social impacts and the resilience. Those are the action tracks. But so this discussion is really live right now as we speak.
Wow, well, very, very interesting.
I'm very excited about that. And because if we only go for the cheapest carb, the best calorie, the cheapest calorie, we only will be eating sugar, because that's the cheapest calorie. And I can tell you one thing, I don't think that we can survive very long on the pure sugar diet. I love sugar. I'm not saying it's not good, but only sugar as the cheapest is not going to work.
Yeah, that's right. We would have lots of problems. I love sugar myself. I have a sweet tooth, but I can't only eat that. So good. So let's shift gears just a little bit and talk about the consumer trends that you see, and especially we've all been through this pandemic. It's hard to imagine it's been 16 months now that we've been living with this COVID-19 situation. But what are the consumer trends that you see coming out post-pandemic that will have an impact on the global food industry?
Well, first, let's if I look at the bank, right, is that the food industry has been extremely resilient. We have, with the exception of the food services in certain regions, right? Think about in the city of London, they had because workers were not going there, but we have seen a lot of resilience. So the food business basically had, from a risk point of view, went very well, right? So I'm very happy about that. The big change, in my view, what happens, I mean, we all talk about the online, but the big change is that we as humanity rediscovered that we can cook. And that we can cook at home, and that we can have a nice meal together with your family around the dining table. So what I really see is that home deliveries, obviously, new cooking, and actually when you stay at home, people are buying more high quality food because they want to have a nice meal on the table. So we didn't see really a big change on let's say the demand of food, other than the normal growth of demand from in the 1-2% a year. But we saw a shift and to do the home cooking and obviously the restaurants, what happened there. But at home, people bought more, and also were willing to upgrade what they were buying. So it was a good development there, and in my view, completely changed the way let's say, food is being consumed in most countries. Let be alone in Africa, the change was not that big, right? But especially in the US, in South America, in Asia, in Europe, you saw that big change. So we had seen the trend in the US that out of home expenditure were much higher.
Right.
We're tending above, let's say, at home, and now it's completely changed again. So most people are enjoying, and I don't think that's going to be that trend is going to reverse so soon. For me, the interesting thing is that if you look at the consumer also, but what we are seeing is that there is a trend of more conscious consumption by the consumer, right? So that's the other trend that we're seeing with the new generation becoming more and more conscious about what am I eating. And also very important is that we as an industry have to make sure that we provide the proper information to the consumer so they can take decisions. I think today there's too much emotional buying going around, hearsay that those things are better than the other. So that's, I was already talking about the nutritious food and the relationship between nutrients and emissions. But we also need, and I think that's I hope that's one of the most important outcomes of the food summit, is that we will have proper labeling, proper legislation, so that we can inform the consumer more properly and not keep it as it is right now, kind of laissez-faire regarding sustainability also.
Yeah. Well, sort of following up as a follow-up question to that. So I think we certainly see, I hear it from people around the world. They're more interested in how their food is produced and in what impact that's having on the world as that happens. But we really don't see that many corporate sourcing decisions based on sustainability verification or that kind of thing. Do you see, I guess what you're talking about, maybe something that will come out of this food system summit is maybe you think something will catalyze those changes or will create change in that regard? And I know you take a global view on this, but I wonder if you could give a little guidance to our US industry. Any suggestions how US soy could make sure we position ourselves to be on the forefront as people are looking more and more for these sustainable and nutritious products?
Well, I think it's always going to be about transparency and storytelling, right? And the fact that digitalization will allow most probably us and you, the industry, to go back almost at the combine and the acreage where it was harvested, and the story of the farmer behind it. So, in my view, if the industry could have that story, that even if you are part of, well, soybean becomes a cooking oil and meal, right? That you can almost trace back to, this is the story of the farmer. I am this farmer, and I really do this thing. This is transparent. I have been in the last year being able to reduce. I know that your industry has been able to reduce the emissions per acreage tremendously. I think it's almost 45% in the last 25 years, something like that. And I'll talk a little bit about numbers that I heard somewhere. That's the storytelling. So traceability, transparency, and storytelling. And I do think that well, U.S. soy, the soy industry, and the global basis is one of the most efficient, let's say, inputs for the industry, not only for the feed, but also for the vegetable oils. Because people forget that you need, even if you are vegetarian, you still need cooking oil to make whatever you're doing, right? Right. Even if you look at, if you're going to have a burger, even if it's a plant-based burger, you still need vegetable cooking oil to make sure that burger is eatable, right? So people forget about that because they just don't have the whole picture in their head. So that traceability, that you can show where it's coming from, and the passion, I do think that we need to reconnect the farmer to society. So that traceability, that storytelling is extremely important.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that's certainly something that we like to try and do as we connect the way that our farmers produce their crops with buyers around the world. I think it does make for a very good story. So let me come now and talk just a bit more about this UN Food System Summit. It's come up a couple of times in our discussion, but from your work with the world's biggest food and consumer companies and working on this, one of the things, do you see that technology and the great productivity gains that we've made using technology, and that have allowed, production to grow 75% over the last 30 years on a footprint that's gotten bigger, but only 25% bigger or so. Do you think that will we still be able, will the technology that's driven the productivity gains, will that continue to be important in the future?
Well, I think technology is going to be everything, right? So, but I think technology will have to change its mind, because our technology that we had today was really about how can we maximize yield. But technology is going to change because we will need to balance yield with the carbon footprint and the water usage. And that's where really is going to be the key. So I do think that there's no way around that if we want to feed 7, 9, and maybe 10 billion people, that we need to increase yields. That's not but the key issue is how can we increase yield, but at the same time increasing, let's say, reducing the carbon footprint, or having plants actually that are have bigger roots so that we can have more carbon sequestrated while we are having high yield. So it's going to change. Technology is going to change in the sense that we also will have to factor in the carbon cash flows. Because if you put price on nature, I do think that the Food Summit is going to come at that we need to use that, means that there is value for technology to look at the better optimization about yield and how much carbon you can sequestrate. And also, most probably, new technologies and new ways of making rotation so you can have more carbon in the land and therefore reduce most use of fertilizer and use of pesticides, so that you can actually, the whole combination, not looking at one crop year, but mostly looking at the 5-year cycle, so that you can maximize your cash flow over that 5 years, but also maximize the nature positive impact of that of your activity. So I think that we will change the way we're looking at farming in the coming years, so that we can actually achieve both, and that's very important, both goals: nature impact and yield growth. Because let's be very, it's impossible. We need to increase food production 50%, and at the same time, we need to reduce the footprint from 12 gigatons to 4 or even under 4. That's a huge productivity. That's only technology going to do that. And obviously, digitalization is going to be important for that. But I think more importantly is that we will need to use new technologies, and especially a lot of new techniques I think we are in the forefront of a new revolution in our industry.
Wow, it sounds like a great place for young people today to get involved in helping develop these new technologies. That sounds exciting. So
Yes.
so how do you see that the people that are sourcing food, the big companies that buy products, do you foresee that they will develop sort of incentive models or something that will tie back into what you're talking about with this nature and technology?
Oh, absolutely. Because all of those large companies, one by one, they're coming out and saying, we will be net zero by 2050. That means that they will have to look at the whole value chain until where they're sourcing, to see what is in there and how can we reduce that, and how can we incentivize that whole value chain to reduce emissions. So it's at the end, it's going to be it's going to happen. And we call that the scope 3, right? That's the whole, your scope 1 is your own emissions, right? And then scope 3 is the emissions of your whole value chain.
Right.
They're going to go out. I mean, the large companies are really making those commitments, rightfully so, right? Rightfully so. But if you do that commitment, you have to really look back at your whole value chain and say, okay, every piece of my value chain, what do I have to do? And the beauty of that, I think so, is that there will be a big shift. And the shift is going to come is that to be able to reduce your emissions of that value chain, it means that you have to share data. And sharing data, and that we all know as a farmer, and I was saying about my father in the beginning, we had no clue, is that to produce without knowing who you're going to sell to, or to produce without having let's say, an idea how the value chain is going to happen, and don't having data of the value chain is going to be, I think, thing of the past. I always make a small comparison, Jim, about when I buy a car here in the Netherlands, different than the US, When I buy a Toyota here, the car is not here. The lamp goes on in the factory in Japan and they start producing the food. There's no way today, if you go and buy a yogurt or any product into the supermarket, there's nowhere a light going on the farmer at the farm saying, please produce 1 extra liter of milk because we just sold the yogurt at the supermarket. I'm making a joke about it.
Yeah, yeah.
But that value chain integration is the only way of reducing the waste and being able to achieve our net zero goals of producing food.
Well, it sounds as though there will be continued opportunities for integration, which is exciting. Well, Barry, our time is zooming by, so I am going to take a little bit of a break. We're going to show a very quick video here, and then we're going to come back and take the audience questions. I want to remind people, use the Q&A widget and make sure you put your questions there in the Q&A. We'll be back in just a short minute or so, and then we'll have we'll take those questions. So thank you very much.
There are a number of reasons why U.S. soy consistently ranks at the top of the global marketplace, but perhaps an important one is the commitment to sustainability in the way that it's grown. Through sustainable farming practices that are done in the field every day, like no-till farming, grass filter strips, cover crops, and crop rotation, U.S. soy farmers are actively engaged in practices to manage water, preserve wildlife habitats, and help improve biodiversity. And with systems in place like U.S. Soy Sustainability Assurance Protocol or its commitment to the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, the facts are indisputable. Through sustainable farming and constant innovation, U.S. soy contributes to a healthier planet. When you dare to compare U.S. soy to soy grown in any other region of the world, you will see that U.S. soy provides the sustainability solutions that global consumers and investors are demanding and adds no extra cost for its verified sustainability. To learn more about U.S. soy's sustainability efforts, reach out to your U.S. soy representative today.
Well, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that quick little video. And I hope you've enjoyed the discussion we've had so far today as much as I have. I think it has been very enlightening. Clearly, Barry has a lot of experience and a lot of great information that he's sharing with us. I want to thank you all for the questions you've submitted. We have a lot of questions, so we're going to do our best to try and work through these audience questions. I might try to package a few of them together to make sure that we try to get to as many as possible. I think Barry will be joining me back here on stage in just a moment, and I'm anxious for him to do that so we can get to these questions. Okay, Barry, welcome back. I hope you had a good break. You probably didn't have time for that chicken curry, but hopefully it's you're getting ready for that. Anyway, first question, and I think this is really an interesting one. So it's kind of a simple one. Do you really believe that consumers are prepared to interpret all of this information that we talk about putting on the label and all of this data that we've talked about today?
Well, obviously, labeling, we have been very successful in labeling, actually, as a society, because we today, we have two things on labels that are very clear. One is the price, the other one is the calories. So we have been very successful in labeling, but we made it simple, right? We made it clearly what it is. So in my view, the label, we should not try to make it too difficult. In my view, there's only two. If we could have a labeling that shows how much water and how much emissions there is on that product, I think that's we already solving 80% of the issue. So we should make it very simple and very intuitive, right? So, okay. But therefore is, and the industry cannot do it themselves, right? So this is really what's going to come out of the summit. I'm absolutely sure is that the summit's going to ask legislation. You already see Europe with the Green Deal starting to go to that way about, okay, what is that label? What are how we should look at it? How should we price it? Yeah, it's just impossible. If I go to the supermarket today, I cannot make a conscious decision about am I buying something with a lot of, let's say, environmental pollution in there or not. Look, I could add biodiversity. I could have social impact, all those things, but you complicate it. I think if we get 80% of it right for the coming 10 years, we're already going to help the planet a lot.
Yeah, that's good. Keep it simple. That's important. So let me shift gears. There's a couple of questions, or several, kind of talking about the things you've been discussing, some of the ideas with carbon sequestration and new technologies to be able to do that. Sound great for first world agricultural countries, or very modern ag producers, the United States, Brazil, other places. But what about in lesser developed countries? I know you've done a lot of work in Africa and other places. Could you just talk about how do you see this fitting globally? Is this just a first world issue, or how do you see this fitting over the whole world?
No, I don't agree that's the first world thing. I think this is something that there are 550 million farmers or so in the world, and we need to find a solution for every farmer. So there's some large farmers that obviously we are, in the Midwest or in Brazil or on Ukraine, but we actually have an active project right now running. We call it Acorn, where we are trying to find a way to also have the benefits of carbon sequestration to smallholder farmers. We already have 2 live pilots going on. I think if you go to our website, you can see something about that. But I'm happy to share what we are doing there. The idea is that I don't believe, right? I don't believe that this is only a first world solution. This is really a total system solution, and that's why we are investing in different multiple solutions. So under the carbon bank that we are doing right now, yes, we are doing pilot with large farming in the US, Brazil, and in Australia, also in New Zealand, but we're also doing piloting in Africa with smallholder farmers. I truly believe that the only solution is if we have a total system change.
Okay. So not limited to only a few large producers, but a worldwide solution.
Yes.
So another question that there's a few like this that talk about the value chain integration and how you talked about transparency and kind of connecting people on the farm. Back to the yogurt example, you buy a carton of yogurt and the dairy producer knows. How do you tie that together with the just-in-time delivery systems and sort of just-in-time manufacturing system we have in the world? And we've already seen a couple of issues with that, with the Suez Canal disruption. Most recently here in the US, we had a bridge that got closed for a few days and stopped barge traffic. How do all those fit together?
Well, look, in my view, it's obvious that that especially in the developing world, we need to in the future to have more buffers in there, right? So the just-in-time is not. Look, food is something so different, right? So the Suez Canal issue, if that boat would have been there for 2 more months, most probably none of us would have suffered in the sense of having hunger, right? My worry is in the world is that it's becoming the just-in-time. We need to look. It's a food system. We need to look at it as a food system, and where we have weaker logistics, we will need to start building buffers. There's no way around it, and that's my very simple view. And like the other part of food is that it's different because you have the seasonalities, right? So what you have is now soy is being produced in the US when we start planting, when Brazil is finishing harvest. So you will, this world is going to change a lot while we try to optimize also the use of nature. And when we come to the use of nature, and that value change is going to be that if you put the cost of nature in there, is that we also will be much smarter about where are we going to produce what. As we put price on nature also, a lot of this demand and this movement of food is going to change because it's not going to be that easy anymore to produce food in place, certain foods in place that doesn't make sense. Nature told us where we should produce what.
Yeah, interesting. And so a related question coming in is about today's the verification systems that exist today to verify sustainability or those kind of things. So with your vision of getting back to this sort of nature costing, how do you think? I think you probably see that, or how will these verification systems change? What will they look like in the future? What will they include that they may not include today?
Well, I will give you a very simple example. Today, if I tell you what is the value of 1 ton of soybean in Chicago, you all know. And if you say how much I'm trading off the board or up the board, you all know. But we don't do that for certification. we have no clue, because there are a lot of certifications out there. There's a lot of things that we actually don't know, where we think it's right, but we don't sure if it's right. Things that actually only talk about fair trade, but it's fair trade only because it's paying well to the farmer, but not talking about nothing about sustainability. I mean, there's so much things out there that we don't know. So one of the key things of the summit that's coming out is that everybody talk the same language. Because we don't speak the same language regarding food, it's becoming extremely difficult. And obviously the consumer is becoming skeptical. And I agree, I understand that. So what standards are we talking about? And so I'm very much of a promoter of let's sit together and let's agree on the standards that we want. So because I mean, a Chicago bushel in Chicago, there is a standard on it. You exactly know the humidity. You actually know everything, right? So let's make that standard also for nature, and then we know what we're talking about.
Yeah, well, and I think that's the only way it will work. So that's a great point. Someone has asked a question about the issue, and this is, I know we could spend all day talking about this, but I just wonder if you could make a comment on this, the importance of reducing food waste. I think you talked about that when you were talking about the reducing the gigatons, but if you could just comment on the food waste situation and how that fits into the whole picture.
Oh, I think we will never, ever be able to achieve the goals that we need to achieve from Paris if we don't materially reduce the food waste, right? So I said 6 gigatons is about use of land, 6 gigatons is about let's say food production, and 2 gigatons then of that is food waste. Yeah, and if we go, right? And if we go up, that could go to 2 or 4 gigatons. I mean, that's almost insane. So for me, the only solution is by means of really reducing food waste. And that 2 gigatons, 1 gigaton is really post-harvest losses, which mostly come with smallholder farmers and those things. So we need to change that. We are talking to IFAD. How can we do that? How can we reduce the post-harvest with very simple things like those refrigerated containers by sunroof with sun panels? We are really talking about smart ideas. And the other 50%, and that's the most horrible of them, they are actually wasted at the end of the value chain in between the supermarket and our fridge. And that's all in developed countries. There's a lack of conscience of the consumer. And that's the one that we should really tackle with education, because it's really because food is becoming so cheap that people don't think about it, the consequences.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. So we have a quick question here. I know it'll just take you a second to answer this, but there have been more than one, so I want to get to it. You've talked a few times about the UN Food Systems Summit.
Yeah.
A couple of people saying, what is that? They're not familiar with that. Could you just give a really quick definition of what that is?
Yes. So in the last years, more and more, there are worries in the globe about the impact of food production on nature. When we did Paris, suddenly everybody woke up and said, whoa, food is really consuming 1/4 of our emissions. And then, so that really boiled to the senses that aren't we now needing to do a Paris for food? And actually, if I could, it's not exactly that, but if I could sum up what I think the Food Summit is the first step of a Paris for food. So you have the COP meeting, that the one we are going to have in Glasgow right now. This is going to be the first COP meeting around food. What are we going to agree around food? So and so the FSS, and it's a big thing with governments, with the food agencies, with private being there. And it has 5 action tracks and levers that go through that action tracks. So there's one action about safe, nutritious food. There's one action track about the consumer. There's one action track about nature, use of nature and farming. The other one is about livelihoods. And the other one is about resilience. Then we have 4 action, let's say, levers that are going through all those action tracks. That's about gender, that's about human rights, that's about finance, and it's about innovation. So this matrix is now meeting every day. We have meetings and we're talking and moving towards this food summit that's going to happen in September, which is really going to talk about is trying to set up, like we had the SDG goals. Most probably we will be working to a food development goals. Maybe I'm simplifying it, but this is kind of a nutshell what it is. But
Yeah.
it's a huge work that's happening. And you talked about my position as chairman of the Food Action Alliance. What the Food Action Alliance is doing is getting public and private partnerships so that we can look at projects that can be included in the summit that can have big impact on value chains at scale. So for instance, one example is, let's set up a global network, a big network of poultry meat factories in Africa. What do you need to do that? Right? You need farmers, obviously, you need genetics, you need the input, you need processes, you need cold storage. So what would that mean? And then you start looking at the partners to come together and, okay, can we do this at scale? I'm giving you some example. Yeah.
That is great. Very interesting. And, you know, I'm afraid our time has wound down, but I'd just like to thank you so much for joining us today. And I hope you found the discussion interesting. I certainly did, and I know our audience did. I would just like to say, you know, with the things that you are involved in, and you just talked about the UN Food System Summit and all the work you're doing on that, it's reassuring for me to hear that somebody that talks about the importance of producing more to feed the hungry world, of the use of technology, and balancing that out with protecting nature. I think what a great perspective, and thank you for bringing that to us today. So I'd really like to thank you again for your time. And I'd just like to say that our organization, and I know all of those that we represent, we certainly appreciate the work we already do with Rabobank in many areas, and we look forward to doing more of that. So thank you very much again for your time today, Barry.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for this technology that makes this sort of thing possible. It would have, you know, we talked earlier about how the changes that have taken place because of the pandemic, and certainly there have been a lot of bad things that have happened, a lot of sad things, but there have also been some new things we've learned. So I think this is one of those. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I would like to encourage all of you that participated today. Thank you for doing so. And please complete the survey that will pop up on the screen when we finish. It's really important to us to get your feedback and to hear what you thought was worth doing again or what you didn't like. The feedback that you provide us is very important to us. We will talk again soon. We'll have another Soy Suite coming up. And until then, thank you for tuning in. Thanks for your support of the U.S. soy industry. And thanks for all you do to help feed the hungry world out there. And once again, Barry, thank you for your time today. I hope you have a great tennis match this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a great day, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you.